All right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and make us live. So we're going to go live with the webinar.
Very nice.
Starting now. Let's see. Getting started. Hi, all. Welcome as you join this afternoon. Good to see you and good to be with you. I'm going to wait one moment for folks to join us, and then we'll get right into our webinar this afternoon. All right, well, it's 2:01, so let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, all. Welcome to today's edition of the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center's Energy Insights webinar series. My name is Allison Carr, and I am a Clean Energy Training Program Manager here at the center. And it is my absolute pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. I am excited to be with you, and we are excited to have expert fleet managers with us as well. So today we are focusing on the topic of planning for a sustainable fleet. And we know that transitioning a fleet is not merely a single transaction, it is a long-range strategic journey. And today, in partnership with LeKay Services, we're going to dive into some of the steps required to execute this successfully. And I am so excited that we will be hearing from experienced fleet managers who are doing this work with their partners and stakeholders. So to give you a structured agenda for today, we are going to be here together for an hour, and we'll start with our brief overview of the center's mission and our programs, followed by some core principles for fleet sustainability. I will then pass the mic over to our fleet managers and Lalu with LeKay Services for an overview and a real-world case study on the value of fleet assessments. And this will lead into our main roundtable discussion. We have about 20 minutes set aside for good conversation with our stellar panel, including Joe Garuba from Helix Water District and Rick Longabart from the city of Raleigh. So we will unpack some of the data collection, vendor selection, and change management topics that are essential for thinking about and moving into planning for a sustainable fleet. And then finally, we have 20 minutes for your questions. And I encourage you to type questions into the Q&A tab or the chat tab as we go. So we will be collecting those and are looking forward to a conversation. So for those of you who are new to us, the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center is housed at NC State University, and we work across the state, the Southeast region, and beyond. And for over 35 years, our mission has been to advance a clean, sustainable energy economy across our region. And while we achieve this by actively educating, demonstrating, and providing boots on the ground support for alternative fuels, energy, policies, and clean energy practices, we like to say that we bridge the gap between academic research, policy, and real-world implementation. And to give you a sense of the scope, our center operates across several key divisions. Our clean transportation team, which is hosting us today, our energy policy, our clean energy training, and clean power and industrial efficiency teams, along with our communications team. So this multidisciplinary approach allows us to address clean transportation not as an isolated issue, but as an integrated part of a broad energy landscape. So when we speak about fleet sustainability, I wanted to kind of establish some definitions as we get started. So I feel and find that sustainability is a philosophy of continuous improvement along with risk reduction. So sustainability encompasses the environmental, economic, and social systems that we all operate within. So from an administrative perspective, this centers directly on energy and efficiency. And because fleets can vary drastically by different vocational requirements, along with other geographical opportunities or limitations, different fuel or vehicle availability, and other variables, we want to emphasize that there's no one-size-fits-all plan. And so moving a fleet successfully towards fleet sustainability, whether that be through alternative fuels, various vehicle technologies, or behavioral changes, this requires two elements. It requires a clear destination, meaning your targets or your goals, and identifying and naming what is important to you and your team. So you have your destination. You also have a clear direction, which represents your strategic planning framework, which is something that Lalu will talk more about and that we'll dive more deeply into in conversation with both Joe and Rick. And as part of our conversation today, I wanted to share a few things that the center has to assist you in finding your fleet's direction and sharing some of the active resources that we have. So first, in tandem with LeKay Services, we provide free fleet assessments for fleets in North Carolina. So we'll start with a basic fleet intake questionnaire to support data collection and analysis, which would be followed up with a phone call to dive deeper and start making recommendations. If you're in North Carolina, we'll share more information at the end of our presentation today for how you can reach out to us to get started. And if you're located outside of the state, we can connect you with LeKay for additional support or suggest additional resources. Second, the Clean Tech Center is a partner of the Charging Smart program, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. So this program provides technical assistance to local governments to achieve greater EV accessibility. This includes actions like reviewing EV zoning requirements or installing public EV charging infrastructure. And participants in this program, local governments can achieve bronze, silver, or gold designation based on certain criteria. And the center works with partners to support community and stakeholder education and engagement in this program. And then lastly, what I want to share today is that the center is home to a fairly recently designated Clean Cities Coalition. The Piedmont and Coastal Clean Communities Coalition is a stakeholder organization which connects fleet managers with OEMs, industry peers, resources and tools, and other funding networks. So that is a great opportunity as well. So now I want to go ahead and transition to our guest experts, and I am delighted to welcome Lalu from LeKay Services, who is serving as my co-host and co-moderator today, and our panel of veteran fleet operations managers, Joe Garuba from Helix Water District and Rick Longabart from the City of Raleigh. So I will turn it over to Rick to introduce himself and the City of Raleigh fleet.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you everyone for joining today. It's my pleasure to be here and look forward to a plethora of questions and helping us all transition to clean energy of one format or another. And to your point, Allison, I completely agree that there is no silver bullet, and everything we touch and everything we do at the City of Raleigh all evolves around some forms of sustainability. Again, my name is Rick Longabart. I'm the Fleet Operations Manager for the City of Raleigh. I've been with the City of Raleigh for close to 5 years, but no stranger to the government sector. Prior to that, I worked for 3 different government agencies in California for 32 years. I technically retired in 2015. I started my own fleet consulting firm called Longabart Ross Consulting in 2013, and I've been doing fleet consulting across the country for the last 13 years and doing equipment replacement utilization software applications. I was recruited by the City of Raleigh in July of 2021, where I've been the fleet manager for the last 5 years and helping them modernize their operation and to make it a little more sustainable, which I think I have evidence of those successes. So been in the fleet industry for over 43 years. It's very passionate for me, and I like helping other organizations meet those targets and goals, and hope to share a little more about what we've achieved in the City of Raleigh for the last 5 years. So again, thank you for having us and look forward to sharing more. With that, I'm going to introduce one of my colleagues, Joe, who has a little more information. If you can go back to that slide, Allison, maybe I'll just hit from a high level a little bit about what we do. So I hit a little more information from a high level of what the City of Raleigh does on a normal day-to-day operation. As you can see on this slide, we manage close to now 4,800 vehicles. We do that out of 3 facilities. We manage 8 different fuel sites. We're bringing an 8th on board. We have 81 positions within our organization. And without getting too granular into the circular of what we do on each day, this is just kind of a high visual. Obviously, our scope is preventative maintenance, diagnosis, and repair of vehicles, but we also manage accidents. We dispose of vehicles. We have over close to 1,500 vehicles that are operating on telemetry, which is a whole sustainability effort in idle reduction, looking at vehicles for transition. Our core goals also are sustainability, EV transition. We have close to 91 ports of EV chargers throughout the city, both combination and public facing. and behind the fence charging, obviously stormwater compliance, obviously, again, another sustainability effort. All of our car washes in our facilities are reclaimed water, again, another effort of sustainability efforts. And then all of our fuel sites obviously use some mechanism of either compressed natural gas. We either use renewable propane, we use R99 for diesel, we use obviously electrification, we use E85, B20. So we are no strangers to the sustainability efforts, and all of our fuel sites are equipped with some type of clean energy measures. So with that, a little quick description of the city of Raleigh's profile, and I will hand the keys over to Joe.
Thanks, Rick. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. My name is Joe Garuba. I work for Helix Water District. Can you go to the next slide real quick, Allison? And I want to thank Allison and Lalu for inviting us. So my background's in city management. I've been in the city management world for close to 30 years. And I currently work for Helix Water District, which is the second largest water agency in San Diego County. We primarily make potable water, and we serve it to about 500,000 people a day. So our background over the last 10 years, I've been with the district about 10 years, and our background is starting in 2017. We started to institute sustainability efforts around our fleet. The fleet is part of my group and in my responsibility for the district. And we are on sort of the other end of the spectrum than Rick, right? So we're a smaller agency from a fleet side. We have approximately 115 vehicles. And because we're in California, we're required to convert our fleet to zero emission vehicles. Starting in 2025, 50% of all new purchases needed to be zero emission, and then by 2030, all new purchases need to be zero emission. So we've been going through that process of amending and augmenting our operations yard to accommodate that. And that's culminated in the construction of 88 level 3 chargers, which should fully satisfy our needs, from now for the next 20 years, so to speak. And we can touch on that a little bit more. And so with that, let me kick it back to, is it Lalu or Ulrich?
I'll take it over from there. Thanks, Joe and Rick. Very privileged to have you both on this webinar. Thanks again, Allison, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Thanks for attending. My name is Lalu Adeola. I'm the managing director and founder at Lake A Services. We are a management consultancy that focuses on helping fleets navigate the mobility energy transition. I've been in this industry for a little over 15 years now. I started as an engineer building vehicles with Navistar International. Back then it was international, and then went on to work in various roles across the industry with EV startups, with larger consultancies, with marketing. And something that we do at Lake A Services, which was one of the reasons that we started this, was understanding that this transition is happening hard and fast, a lot faster maybe 5 years ago. Well, at least we thought it'd be a lot faster 5 years ago, but it's still going fast and still very impactful. So through the next couple of pages, we'll just talk you through how, as Lake A Services, we help fleets think through this transition, and then that will serve as the basis as the conversation that I'll go on to have with Joe and Rick going forward. So as we go to the next page, I wanted to start by just laying out, I think, what all of you know intuitively, how this process should work. It doesn't always work this linearly, but if you try to be kind of structural and sequential about how to think about this, you always want to start with the plan. How many vehicles do I have? What's the savings potential? What technologies are out there that can work with our goals, be it cost savings or emissions reductions? I mean, with the clean cities as a North Star here, emissions is a big deal. And then what does that roadmap look like? How many vehicles do I start with? What infrastructure do I need? And then how do I sequence it based on how it's all performing? After that plan, we start looking at implementation. Which vendors, which utilities do I have to work with? How do I pay for this? What incentives are available? And that in itself is a whole body of work. How do I write these RFPs to be actually representative and help us protect us from known unknowns? And then ultimately, you're down to operating. And like I said, these things almost happen in parallel, out of order, but then you get your first couple of CNG vehicles, or you put in your first EV charging piece of infrastructure. And so then you have to track the performance. What's the uptime like? What's the actual cost of fuel or energy you're using to move these vehicles? And then continue to tweak. What are the policies and procedures that are going to help you to make the most of the potential of these technologies? And then continuously tweak and fine tune, and then you're buying your next set of vehicles, so you're back to plan. So this is just an easy visual, I think, to help folks understand how we think about this transition. On the next page, we then talk about how most fleets don't fail because technology is bad. Like most transitions, fleets, y'all are awesome. The transitions themselves are very painful experiences, and they don't often stall because the technology isn't good enough, even though sometimes it is, but that's not the bulk of what we find. It's largely due to planning, which is why we thought this webinar would be important. The top three failure modes are: one, sequencing error. We often find that folks get vehicles, and when it's 2 months out from delivery, then they realize, oh wow, we need charging, and then you realize charging is a 12 to 18 month backlog before the utilities can get your site up to speed, or X and Y other things. And so the sequencing error, which really come out from the planning process, often gets people short-footed. Then we look at the decision gap. It's either there's something is being pushed onto you as a fleet manager that you're not quite in tune with, or you have a separate plan, and then when it moves up, your vendor doesn't have the right vehicle, so you all of a sudden have to substitute something that's not actually a good fit because they're ulterior motives, they're out of your control, and different sort of decision gaps that we often see popping up. And then ultimately, there's the vendor overload. With this transition, I mean, electrification is what we focus most of our time on this discussion in, but it goes on to CNG, it goes on to propane, all the different technologies. There's so many new vendors who to trust, who can actually deliver, who'll be there in 3, 4 years. We were at Alric and I were on a panel a couple of weeks back at the Government Fleet Expo, and somebody mentioned they had bought vehicles from an OEM that has since gone out of business. How are they going to get parts? So making sure that you're picking the right vendors is very crucial. So we're hoping that at the end of this discussion, you're thinking about good framework, which that'll help you make your decisions. We'll talk through examples, some that I've seen, and then obviously from Joe and Rick here, and then start. I think one takeaway that I'll love everybody on this call to have is like write something down that you can start Monday morning, better yet, tomorrow, Wednesday morning, and put it into practice, or start thinking about it more actively. The next page is one more framework. I'm a consultant, so we always think in frameworks. I apologize. But this framework thinks about, we've been reflecting at Lake A Services throughout last year about what does a modern fleet look like? And we spoke to a lot of people in the ecosystem, fleet managers, our clients, vendors, OEMs, charging infrastructure providers, and we were able to distill it into these 6 buckets of what a modern fleet looks like. And then it gets even more accelerated when you think sustainable fleet planning, because you have to be clear on what solutions you're bringing to play and how they all talk to each other. From the vehicles, and under the vehicle bucket, we include everything from upfitting to the duty cycle, what vehicles are going to match to what technology. Then on the energy or fueling, I mean, charging infrastructure is just a whole new world of complications that fleets haven't been used to. But even if you're dealing with the CNG or LNG or even reduced idle equipment in your vehicle, you have to think about what that implication is to fuel and how you're going to sequence that, what kind of fueling cards and programs you have. Then we get into financing. Who's paying for all this change? Is it a city budget allocation? Are you applying to grants? Are you doing all these charging as a service, EV as a service programs? I know different municipalities have different regulations related to that. Then we come down to operations and maintenance. With these new technologies, there are going to be new failure modes. How are you getting the right service level agreements with these vendors? Are they going to be around? How are you training your drivers and your technicians to work on using these technologies to make sure they're ahead of the curve? And then number 5, we have data and telematics, and that's been one of the biggest shifts. Everybody has, not everybody, but many fleets at this point have telematics devices that you plug into your OBD2 port, and that's even changing now with this native cloud vehicles that share data that way. And then driver monitoring devices, you have all this FMIS systems. So systems and data sources, and how are you making sure that it's all getting put in a place that you can actually use it to inform how your fleet performs, which segues into the performance management. All of this is moot if there's not a way for you to evaluate, is it working, is it not working? How do I then feed into my next planning cycle? How do I feed into making decisions that help us improve and deliver against your mission? Because like I said, I know I talked about costs and I talked about emissions, but ultimately as a fleet manager, as a fleet director, you have to deliver against your mission, whether it's emergency services or street sweeping or whatever it is. You have to deliver on that, and that has to be forefront with the caveat of trying to save on costs and emissions. That is just as important. So with this framework, and I know I'm going a little fast and just want to get us to the discussion so we're not talking at you the whole time. Uh, I wanted to tell you about an example of a fleet that we worked with almost 2 years ago, based out of Texas, last mile delivery, FedEx ground fleet. And we conducted an analysis. It was a 4-week sprint where we took their data, looked at it, run it through a couple of different models, all on while interviewing the technicians on staff, interviewing the fleet manager, understanding where they wanted to go. We built a 10-year TCO model, assuming these vehicles get depreciated for zero residual value. And I know different fleets have different policies there. And then with that, we're able to develop vendor recommendations and develop a roadmap. It was 32 vehicles we were looking at. We said, okay, you can probably operate with 28 vehicles because I think it was nine of their vehicles were just there for backup because they had so many failures en route. So they had a good almost 30% of their fleet for redundancy. And so we recommended, okay, transition, go to something with less reliability issues, do some charging as a service, and we identified almost $500,000 in annual cost savings. I know most of you fleet managers already operate on a tighter ship than this example, but I like using this example because it's almost like the best case scenario. If you are not necessarily have your ducks in a row, even for this example, we had to go and put in a telematics device and have them run it for a few months to see, okay, what are they actually doing versus what they think they're doing, and then help them with the plan. It was a 3-year transition. We identified the right vendors that would give them short-term charging solutions on site and then transition them as they built out their own infrastructure with the help of the bigger FedEx facility. And so this is just an example of the kind of things that we find with fleets when we work. And I wanted you to have that. And obviously we have Joe and Rick here to talk about what they've done in their operations and pitfalls they've run into. And with that, I think we start to transition to the conversation. I have my contact info here. I don't know if we're going to share this deck later on, but feel free to reach out with any questions, and we can pop it up at the end of the discussion. So, yeah, let's transition.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. So let's jump into it. I think Rick, you came off mute, so you'll be the first one. As folks on this webinar want to understand how to plan for a sustainable fleet, can you walk us through how you got started, and then maybe we can hear a little about Joe, because from our prior discussions, I know you guys approach it quite different, and you've had different experiences, Rick, in California and on the East Coast, and I know Joe is in San Diego. So we'd love to get those different flavors.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and thank you for that, and I appreciate you framing it up. There's some things that I think are probably standard process and procedures that probably Joe and I probably utilize that you just shared. There's an element there that I want to touch on if the timing is right, and I think you might be surprised. I think you might find that Joe's and my philosophy are very similar in kind, especially having spent 32 years in the government sector. And one thing I will tell you, a little bit of flavor. From my current experiences, both on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and I would probably refer to it as more as the South than anything else. Is that Joe's experience is a little bit different, and for those that are on the call that are on the West Coast, I always frame it as more of you shall due to AQMD and air quality management and CARB. You're kind of mandated, right? So there's a lot of regulatory issues that you shall do because he lives in the world of regulation, right? I mean, and that makes it somewhat easier, but also more demanding, right? Because you're having to do things that are dictated to you. Where in the South, it's more we refer to as "Mother May I," right? And so we're not told what to do, but we're asked to obviously do certain things, but we don't have the mandates nor the incentives that are mandated in the west coast of our country, right? But one thing we do are fortunate to have, and I think most probably states across the country, is we have what we refer to as our climate action plan. And so we reference that a lot in anything we request and everything we do, because we do have a mandate from a city perspective to be 80% zero emissions by 2050. And so we use that to our advantage because of the nature of my background and experience is that, we think from a fleet perspective that sustainability efforts augment and help us advance to a cleaner fleet, more reliable fleet. And we do our things as good stewards of our community, because we recognize the fact that anytime we can implement some type of sustainability, it means reduce community taxes. It means cleaner air, a better place to work, a better place to live, a better place to play. And so our efforts are, how do we provide the services within our community and yet still make it efficient and make it affordable and provide a cleaner environment for our future use of our state, right? And so we focus on everything we touch and everything we do in a sustainability effort. But still, you got to have a baseline. And where do you get started? So let me just use a little bit of our EV transition as a way of explaining how we got started on the EV space. Is we thought we needed some type of structure. So we wrote what we refer to as EVISOR, which is a short acronym for EV Implementation Strategy Rollout. And we wanted a business plan, a Bible or roadmap, however you want to describe it, as to what we were going to do, when we were going to do it, how we were going to pay for it, what the vehicles that were going to be replaced, and how we were going to pay for it. And so when we first approached the city, we referred to it as a plan. We said we wanted a clean energy plan. And the city came back and said, well, we already have a plan. We have a climate action plan. We have a transit and transportation plan. And so what you're asking us to do is adopt another plan of a plan of a plan. And we said, well, we're not necessarily writing a plan. We're actually writing a roadmap of what we were going to do, when we were going to do it, what the vehicles were going to be replaced with, what the cost of the vehicles were going to be, what the charging infrastructure would cost, training behind the wheel and both underneath the hood, and what those costs were going to be for building that infrastructure. So when Rick decides to retire someday, he will be able to hand over the baton to the next person, and they will be able to exactly determine where we're at and where we're going to go. And so we have a very structured document of 164 pages of titillating reading, which I'll be honest, I don't know that anybody in the city has read every word to word of 164 pages, but it is a very strategic roadmap that helps us understand where we're at and where we're going to go. And that really helps us utilize that to promote our strategy. But we also need to understand and be honest to ourselves is, how do we collect that data and how do we know which vehicles to replace? And so to your mention, where do you get started? So our first case was, let's look at what vehicles we have on the road, and let's look at the domiciles. Let's look at the total cost of ownership, and let's look at the lowest hanging fruit. So we utilized a variety of different tools in order to get us there. One was our FMIS, which you mentioned, our Fleet Management Information System. The other was our fuel management system, because those are all the records of each and every transaction. So we know how much fuel is being consumed by those assets that we're identifying that needs to be replaced, right? And then the other part of that collection of technology was our telemetry, is we need to know where our vehicles are domiciled, right? And how often they're being used. What is the dwell cycle of each and every vehicle, so we know which ones are lowest hanging fruit and candidates of electrification. And so we used a lot of that information using domiciles. What we didn't expect to find out was we have a plethora of vehicles that are all over this 27 square miles of the city and growing. And so it makes it a little more challenging when you find out that you're not going to be able to put a charging station in every place where a vehicle parks, because they don't all park in a building, right? Some park in parks, some parks near fire stations, some park in random parking lots, some are taken home. And so it makes it a little more challenging when you have to ask yourself, where am I going to start to build out infrastructure? And so once we kind of collapsed that and we said, well, here's the vehicles that we can identify that are potential candidates for electrification, is that we said, here's where we can start out building out infrastructure. So it's kind of like, how do you eat an elephant? And it's pretty much one bite at a time. When you have a complex fleet of 75 or 4,700 vehicles and you have them scattered throughout the community. And so there's a lot of things that you need to put together. And I don't want to get the conversation too ahead of the horse, but what you realize quickly in electrification is that, when you're building out a fleet that is moving towards sustainability and you have fueling sites throughout the community, when you talk about drop-in fuels or you talk about a compressed natural gas or a renewable propane station, it's easy to get the vehicles to the site. But when you're talking about electrification, it makes it a little more complicated because you're not going to go to one location. And so you have to strategically know where your vehicles are commuting from and what are the domiciles and where do they spend most of their time, because you can't fuel and charge a vehicle as fast as you can putting 20 gallons worth of gasoline in a vehicle. It takes a long time to charge a vehicle, depending on whether it's a level 2 or a DC fast charger. So you have to have a little more strategic planning in place. And not to mention the fact that a lot of our buildings are relatively older, and so they don't have the transformer, the system switch, trenching, engineering, designing, and other aspects of it. So there's a long planning element of it. And then you start to realize from a fleet manager perspective this is not one thing that you can do alone. It's that you have to have collaboration with a variety of different stakeholders within your community. So I will leave it at that, because I'm sure there are more discussions that are more granular in a particular space, if that helps.
Yeah, actually, if I could jump in on a little bit on that. So kind of getting started. So again, let me make some clarifying statements. The first is, so Helix Water District, we have gone through a large scale implementation project. So what we wound up doing is during COVID, we were kind of looking at the state of our fleet and also the state of the state. It's not hard to read the tea leaves that California is basically mandating that public agencies go to a zero emission vehicle. And so we asked the question kind of from a macro perspective of, if we have to convert our entire fleet, what would that look like? And there were some caveats in that assessment. So we didn't want to add any bodies. We didn't want to add any vehicles. We didn't want a Monday vehicle and like a Tuesday vehicle. We didn't want to change our times of when we were working. Part of it is we're in the street during the day. So, obviously doing construction at night isn't really feasible. And so we had sort of this list of criteria, and we started working through what would it take to actually electrify our fleet. We came to some observations that kind of caught us by surprise. The first is, and it's probably anybody that does EV charging now, that the amount of energy that EV vehicles require is extraordinary compared to facilities. And so, as Rick said, very few existing facilities are going to have the infrastructure to support widespread EV adoption. And so that got us looking at really specific things, such as how much power is available on like the local circuit that we're tapped into, and can we get additional drops to our site to support EV charging. We wound up, so our facility uses about 300 kilowatts. After our analysis of what it would take to support our charging schemes, we came out with, we need a point charging capacity of 6 megawatts, right? So fundamentally different, much, much larger. And it triggered a much broader conversation about what project would we put together in order to facilitate that change. How's the cost? I mean, obviously it's going to be super expensive. How do we deal with that? So we had to bring finance in, we had to bring our engineers in, we had to bring our operators in, because that's obviously a huge shift. And then the other thing that we came to the conclusion of is level 2 chargers are basically useless for medium and heavy duty fleets, right? And so we run a bunch of things like dump trucks and crew trucks and things that have battery sizes well in excess of 250 kilowatts. And so there's no way you're going to be able to charge that and stay operationally effective with a level 2 charger. And so as we we ultimately were able to secure grant funding for the total project was just north of $11 million. We installed 88 level 3 chargers. They're different sizes. They kind of range from 40 kilowatt all the way up to 640 kilowatt. We have 2 of those. And we are, we're growing our fleet, but the reality is we weren't able to grow it. Like I couldn't buy a Peterbilt dump truck if all I had was a 6 kilowatt level 2 charger. So now that we have the infrastructure in place, we went through, we constructed it, we were able to secure over $10 million in grants. We're kind of the first one out of the gate, and we're the first one that is built like a comprehensive solution. So we're done. We did include generator transfer switches. So we have portable generators, we have on-site fueling, and then we've also been written into the county's operation or emergency operation plan to support like regional charging in case of emergency. So, but it takes a village, as Rick said. A lot of people need to be involved, and it's one of those things that every time you start to like pull it apart, there's 50 other questions you have to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to look not only like in the immediate, you have to be in the front row, but then you also have to be able to put yourself in the organizational balcony, because we're long-term players, right? We're going to be here for 100 years. So when we build things, we want to make sure that we're building something that's going to last. So.
Yeah,
I love
and
that,
I couldn't agree with Joe more heartily. And I think that's part of the learning curve in all of this, is that it's not a matter of just putting a charger in the ground or buying an electric vehicle. That's the easy part, and I refer to it as maybe the sexy part. It's really understanding the operational needs of your stakeholders to better understand how you're going to support them. Otherwise, once you get to a point where you get a bunch of naysayers and think the rollout doesn't go accordingly, you get a lot of pushback. And we're in government, so we're not a private agency. We're not a corporation. And so therefore, we need to get buy-ins. We need champions in order to promote what we're doing in our efforts. And once somebody says this is not working and we need to go back to diesel, it can sideways your strategy in a hurry. And to Joe's point, there are some vehicles we can survive on L2s when it comes to light duty sedans and pickup trucks that have dwell cycles that says, we can end our route at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or even 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then resume again at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, because we have that bandwidth in that dwell cycle of charging the vehicle. But when it comes to heavy apparatus, right, and it's not going to make it through the full cycle, is you can't depend on an L2 charger when you're going to sit there for 6 to 8 hours to charge when it really needs to be on the road. So you need to have some type of assessment of how many of these are going to be L2s versus how many of these are going to be DC fast chargers. So when we did our strategy, the first round of it was more of a 1-to-1 ratio until we realized that financially, we can't afford a 1-to-1 ratio to every vehicle where there be a charger. For 2, there's not enough parking spots to put L2 chargers at every bay. And 3, it wasn't really needed. We kind of designed it as more of a 4-to-1 ratio. And that was just our thought, right? Is that for every 4 vehicles, there'd be 1 charger with dual ports. And so our assessment is 500 chargers at the end of the day. And 50 DC fast chargers to support our transition of 2,100 vehicles over the course of the next 10 years. Not that we're anywhere near that site and we're going to hit each and every target, but that's our goal, is to transition 2,200 vehicles. And how do we do that? How do we pay for it? But I think the most important part of that element, and you hit on everything about the strategy, but one thing that we greatly overlooked, and I encourage all to do, is to make sure you have conversations with your stakeholders, right? And you train them properly to better understand how an electric vehicle works. And so we're a little behind the 8 ball at a certain point. So we gradually accelerated that. And we have now a EV behind the wheel training to help them better understand how to operate an electric vehicle, how to respond to emergencies, high water, floods, and things of that nature, to make sure they fully understand it. And then our technicians need to be trained as well. So I think that's one of the other pieces of the puzzle that you need to take in consideration before you start bringing fleets of vehicles into your fleet, is to making sure that your operators are comfortable with the vehicles and your technicians are educated to maintain and repair those vehicles.
Hey, Rick,
Absolutely.
on that question, or Lola, can I bounce
Of
to
course,
the
please.
there's a slide that shows kind of what we installed. And Rick, I wanted to touch on that. So in our conversations with our folks at our operations yard, what we realized is that our operations yard needed to remain functional. And when
Hmm.
you start installing chargers on a broad scale, you can really impact the usability of the yard because of the way the cords are located, because of all of the disruption on the ground, the tripping hazards, things like that. So what we wound up doing is, for a large portion of it, we have power cabinets. So one solution we went with was a Heliox product. It's called the Flex 180. And so we can push 180 kilowatts to 3 dispensers. But then what we did is, so we put the power cabinets kind of behind bollards on the side where nothing can hit it. And then we took the dispensers and we hung them from the air, and then we fabricated up cable reel, uh, like a Hubble cable reel. We put those companies in touch with each other, and then that way we're able to like pull the cable down, plug it in, and then that happens at night. We have a management software program that then does like handles all the charging schemes, and then in the morning our guys come in, they unplug, and it goes back up. But the point is, in our conversations with our operators, we recognize, and working at the yard, we recognize the importance of maintaining our ability to stay functional, which is I can't have people tripping over cords all the day, all the time. And so in those conversations, it's not only just this, it's also like it influenced our design considerably. If you could go to the next slide. One of the other things we identified is like our guys wanted an ability to put a lot of power back into like a dump truck or something, ultimately like a hydro excavator whenever those get electrified, when they come in and go to the warehouse or they go to lunch or they've got a meeting on site. And so we created two of these, and these are 640 kilowatt chargers. And these are sort of like the gas station model, right? So they have a couple of ports on each one. You can push 320 kilowatts on one side, and we didn't go with the liquid cooled. So 320 kilowatts is like the most we can push through. And so as guys come in and they're getting stuff out of the warehouse or they're eating lunch, they're able to get 40 minutes worth of juice, which is a fair amount, and to keeps them operational. It's also one of the ones that we backed up with our emergency generators so that we can really push through a lot of juice uh, to vehicles that show up. We are opening up our site to depot charging, and so other agencies, as they develop their sites, they still need to have electric vehicles, and so we're signing other agencies up to come in and use our facility until they're able to get stood up. But again, this all sprung from conversations that we had with our operators, to make sure that they were comfortable in that transition to an EV world.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's real. I mean, that's a key way of transitioning, especially in the electrification world. And I know this is a broad scope of all things sustainable and not necessarily electric, but there's so much to be discussed. It's hard to get in all of the sustainability efforts in an hour. But we did something very similar, but we're not nearly to the 640 kW. So I commend you, Joe, in that effort because that's huge. We're closer to the 200 kilowatts, so not even a quarter of that. But one thing that our approach is kind of similar to Joe's is that we know we're not going to put DC fast chargers at every building because we just don't have the load capacity. So we're kind of treating our fuel sites as a fuel hub. So rather than employees thinking, well, we're going to have a charging location at every building. No, we don't have a fuel site at every building. How do you get fuel? Well, you go to our fuel sites, right? You don't obviously you don't build a fuel site at every building, municipal building, because we have hundreds of municipal buildings. And so our philosophy is that we'll build fuel hubs like at our fuel sites, and we'll put in DC fast chargers at those locations and treat it like a commodity, right? Commodity, whether it's electric, whether it's propane, whether it's CNG, whether it's renewable propane, is that they go to a fuel site. So their mind behavior kind of changes, is that I don't need a EV charger at each building. And when I need to charge, I go to similar to what Joe has, I go to my fuel site and I wait for however long I need to, hopefully no more than 10, 20 minutes, half an hour at most. And I charge at the fuel sites just like I put a gallon of gasoline in my vehicle. And so it kind of gets them more into that behavioral mindset that they need to manage charge just like they need to manage the fuel gauge on their vehicle, right? And so it kind of changes that paradigm shift a little bit. Not everybody drinks the Kool-Aid, but it helps them to better understand that they need to manage charge just like they manage a fuel tank.
Thanks, guys. I mean, I think you guys went through almost all the questions that we had prepared, but I mean, what's lovely is that we have been getting some questions in the Q&A. Please keep bringing them in. I want to build a couple of points on some of the questions I've seen. I've seen one around how do you deal with emergency management in for renewable and for electricity. You can't just bring in a truck to charge it. Then some folks talk about how you think about energy storage. Again, I think these questions are kind of related. But as we get to those, I think something that's crucial that from what you both mentioned is how stakeholder management is so key. I mean, given that your public sector, it's even more influence of a game that you have to play. But even in private sector, you talked about finance, the operators, the techs, the drivers. Can you talk a little bit more about I think buying EV infrastructure and preparing for those emergency situations, how you bring who are the stakeholders, number one, and number two, how do you make sure that you're comfortable with those edge cases, those emergency scenarios that you're covered?
Yeah, great question, Joe. And I'll take a stab at this. I think a couple things have happened, right? Is that we learned as we go, right? I wish to say that we had all the answers from the get-go, but we didn't, right? But one thing that we did do, I think, is really helpful in this transition is we developed what we would call to as another acronym for a long term called CERC. And CERC stands for Clean Energy Equipment Replacement Committee. So rather than myself or our procurement fleet analyst to go out and buy vehicles and then say, here's the keys, good luck, wish you best, call us if you need anything, is that we use more of a philosophy of a clean energy equipment committee. And so what happens is when vehicles are up for replacement, we have stakeholders that are citywide of unbiased individuals, such as budgeting, purchasing, HR, police, and fleet, and sustainability, Office of Sustainability. And we get the list of vehicles that are due for replacement. And then we send it to the stakeholders and say, what are your needs, right? Give us back your specification of the vehicle and the fuel type. And they send it back to us. We evaluate it as a committee and say, well, you're asking for these vehicles. Now let's do some analysis on them. Let's look at the dwell cycles. Where are they parked? Do they get taken home? How many miles do they travel? We have a series of algorithms that it scores a point score of each asset. And if it falls within a certain criteria, that says that vehicle is a candidate for electrification. And then we have like a drop down. So we never start with diesel. We always start with the highest sustainable vehicle. And so it could be a BEV. If it can't be a BEV, can it be a PEV? If it can't be a PEV, can it be a HEV? And if it can't be either one of those, can it be a compressed natural gas or can it be a propane vehicle? And push comes to shove, can it be a gas or diesel? Once we select the algorithm based on the point score, based on how that vehicle is used, we send it back to the stakeholders and they say, you know what, that you're right. That can be an electric vehicle based on the cycles and how that vehicle is used and where there is a close charging location. So now we're starting conversations rather than dictating. And so in some cases we succeed, in other cases we don't. But at least there's that exchange of conversation. And guess what? In that exchange of conversation is a little bit of edification. And so we can teach as we go rather than strong arm and play it with, a carrot rather than a stick. And so that has been very instrumental in starting conversations. But there's also that, how do we make sure they're comfortable in that type of vehicle? And I'm not sure if I remember all of your question, but I think I hit on part of it.
No, like you mentioned earlier, that's a Mother May I approach, and you mentioned you have your procurement analyst, you have your clean energy transition board, which is a stakeholder, from HR to sustainability office. So you're talking to a bunch of different stakeholders, police, the fleet. So good to know who's involved in helping this message stick. Joe,
I want to just add on one more thing before we pass it over to Joe, because I know Joe's going to hit on this too, is that the question I think I recall you asking is that what happens if, right? And we get this a
In the
lot.
emergency scenarios, who are the
What
stakeholders and how
happens
do you
if?
plan for emergency? Yeah.
Yep. We're in North Carolina, hurricane season, right? Is upon us. And so that's always the question. So the way we augment that is looking at microgrids. We have solar array canopies that can charge. We have portable trailers that we can use for charging, but we also recognize the fact that we're not the only game in town. So there are third-party chargers throughout the state where we can use what we refer to as a WEX card, which is nothing more than a central fuel network card where we can go to third-party chargers if ours are down. We also recognize the fact that Ford and some of the major players also have networks where they can go to as well. And so while we're not
Ayala,
100%
yeah.
off the grid and using microgrids because that is a large expense, is we do have some ways of combating that, right? And so we have to look at strategies to be more reliant and off the grid, but it becomes incredibly expensive. And so we use our best practices to augment some of those things. And software has a big part of it too. So I think Joe hit on this a little bit, is that even though a vehicle's plugged in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, doesn't mean it's necessarily charging, because we can enable, disable, we can do load management, load shedding with our software that's networked to our chargers, so that we're not paying peak hours, because what you'll find oftentimes is that while electrification is clean out of the tailpipe, it could be very expensive, and even more expensive than traditional ICE vehicles if you're charging during peak hours. So we have to have technologies that combat that. I've said enough. I'm going to pass it back over to Joe.
Yeah, Joe, who are your stakeholders and how do you manage emergencies?
No, I think Rick, you brought up a bunch of good points. I mean, so we're considered first responders. And so when we looked at being able to operate in a zero emission vehicle world, and how that would impact our ability to be responsive, clearly we needed to make sure we had backstops for a loss of power off the grid, right? And so what we did is we have emergency generators, portables on hand to help support the water infrastructure. And so we just made sure as we were designing our system that we had disconnects into a certain number of our chargers so we could plug those in. We have on-site fueling currently because some of our portable generators use renewable diesel. And then we coordinated with the county and other agencies because of our layout. We're sort of primed to have everybody roll through our site. And so we have an ability to get a larger generator that we can plug in and support, 2 megawatts worth of charging. And then we can roll agencies through as the emergency requires. So we have a couple of different options. We did look at solar, but the reality is the EV charging is so significant that we were space constrained that there is no way we could generate that kind of energy off of a solar field to satisfy our needs. And then we also looked at a BESS, but because of the way that it gets calculated, it's additive instead of like a swap. So it was going to push us over the 4,000 amp circuit that we were using, and then that gets really, really cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
So we stayed away from BESS, and I'm not smart enough to do energy arbitrage. So at that point, so we're pretty straightforward, but definitely took into account emergency response.
Very, very nice. Very nicely told. So, I mean, I'm curious. None of you mentioned IT, and there's a program Lake Services just recently rolled out around kind of buying charging infrastructure, and it's around the key fact that a lot of the reliability issues are software issues, but those are not often considered in at least purchasing before. I'm hoping now more and more fleets are thinking more systematically around purchasing this, because whatever hardware you buy, you need the software, the charging management software to sit on it. It needs to fit into your FMIS and other systems. It needs to be this charge management, and then when the failures do happen, which is kind of inevitable, how do you make sure they get back on time? How do you make sure the systems can talk to each other within your security protocols? And so making that part fine-tuned. So I'm curious, both of your experience with dealing with IT, has that been a crucial piece of, again, having all these systems and all these data pieces talk to each other, or has that been a non-issue in your experience?
I will tell you, we were very fortunate about a year and a half ago. And so we had a fuel management system that was sunsetting and did not support EV infrastructure. And so we were able to campaign for $1.2 million about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we changed out our fuel management system because, again, remember, as I started the conversation, is that we don't have one particular silver bullet in our sustainability arsenal. We look at all different bridge technology, whether it's idle reduction, renewable propane, CNG, and so on and so forth. And so when we looked at a new fuel management system, we wanted to be sure that our new fuel management system could support EV charging, because we treat electrification as a commodity. And we also need to recognize the fact that as you build out more EV chargers, someone's flipping that energy bill, just like you're dropping off 8,500 gallons of gasoline in an underground or above ground storage tank. And someone needs to pay for that. We're an internal service fund. So everything we do has to, obviously, from a financial standpoint, needs to pencil out so we're solvent. So our revenues need to match our expenditures. And so we charge back for all of our fuel, regardless of what commodity that is. And we also recognize the fact that as energy gets larger consumption for EV vehicles, that we need to charge that energy back to our stakeholders, meaning our departments that use our charging locations. And so when we went out to bid, we made sure that our new fuel management system can not only manage all of our liquid and gaseous fuels, but also needed to be able to network all of our chargers. So while we haven't done each and every one of them yet, is all of our chargers will be networked to our fuel management system, which will be integrated into our fleet management system. So it's one pane of glass. So every time there's a transaction, whether it's gasoline, diesel, propane, CNG, electrification, that comes across as a commodity for how much they've used for energy, how long they've charged for, how many kilowatts they use, which vehicle received the energy, who charged it, which vehicle was charged, how long they've been there charging, is it enabled, disabled, does it need to be connected, is it fully charged? So we can see all that through one pane of glass. And so our fuel management system is our system of record. And all of that is integrated into our fleet management information system. So we know total cost of ownership, how to bill it out, historical history of the vehicle maintenance and repairs, and the productivity of our technicians, the life cycle of the vehicle, when it should be replaced. And so all of that is networked together.
So I
found that to be the most important part of the puzzle is software and integration. So our IT folks, since it's cloud and not on our network, do not have any resistance against that networking, because the chargers are communicating via a cellular communication to our cloud-based fuel management system.
I'm cognizant of time. I know we only have a few minutes left. I see some more questions we didn't get to answer. I think Allison and Alric, again, I want to shout out to Alric. Thanks again for the help here. We can take those down and maybe respond offline. I saw one about home charging. But last rapid fire question, I'll start with you, Joe. For everybody on the call today, what's one thing they should walk away with that maybe you wish you knew when you were starting your process? And then we'll come up to you, Rick, and then pass it back to Allison.
Yeah, I'll make it brief. Make sure you understand all of the puzzle pieces, and there's a lot of them, and especially if we're focused on electrification, because what you don't realize is that you have to bring in your stakeholders, you have to bring in your IT department, you have to bring in your facility folks, you have to bring in your technicians, you have to bring in your stakeholders, you have to bring in your utility companies such as Joe, right? Because without utility companies such as energy providers, is that they're the conduit that's going to bring in the transformers and the system switches. And if you can't do an upgraded transformer, then all the money in the world, even if you can buy the charger, you can't install it into the ground. So there's a plethora of people that you need to understand that circle of community that you need to get involved in. It's not just one person or one operation. Joe?
Yeah, I think for us, it's recognize that it's going to take some time. If you're not being mandated and you have an opportunity to kind of move thoughtfully through the process at sort of self-driven pace, you can start small. You can and get a handle on kind of what your fleet looks like, right? A lot of my companion agencies don't have a great handle on what their replacement schedule looks like. And, when they span that out, do I need 10 vehicles in 5 years or do I need 25 vehicles in 5 years? And so spend a little bit of time thinking about that. Think about kind of, where do you want to get to in the next 15 or 20 years? Because those are the planning horizons that we're dealing with. And then also give yourself some grace, right? Like we are a risk adverse business. And so there's not like profit. We're not being driven by profit. Nobody's getting rich making these choices. And so as you go through it, just recognize change is hard for government and give everybody a little bit of grace and go slow in the beginning in order to go kind of faster once you get into the construction phase.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. We could have this conversation all afternoon into tomorrow, do this weekly. I don't know, but I want to say thank you so much for those insights. And I have a few wrap-up comments I want to share. Again, like these guys have said, we want to turn these insights into action or support you in turning insights into action. And so if you are located in North Carolina, we highly encourage you to reach out to us for a free fleet assessment. It's a no-cost kind of early on data-driven early roadmap that can help you align your information and get your transition off the ground. So you can follow this link here or snap this QR code and submit that first fleet intake form. Also, we have some fantastic opportunities coming up to connect in person. I'd be remiss if I let you all go today without mentioning our upcoming Sustainable Fleet Technology Conference and Expo, which will be happening in Durham at the Durham Convention Center on August 23rd to 25th, 2026. You can register now or check out our agenda online. We will be, joined by folks across the region, across the Southeast at this event. So if you have questions, please reach out. And then finally, my invitation is for you to join us at our next Energy Insights installment webinar. You can watch today's recording or watch previous recordings at this Go link on the bottom here, or join us in person or online in October for our next webinar series session. And that will be focused on hands-on training for solar, hosted by our training program. And then finally, I want to say thank you so much to our panel of experts, to Lalu and Lakay Services, and most importantly, to all of you for joining us today and sharing your questions. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. This is my email address. I can connect you with our speakers. I can share additional contact information. And again, this recording will be available after today. Give us a few days to get it posted, but we'll be happy to share this. Or if you have folks you want to share it with, please do. I hope you have a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or afternoon or wherever you are. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Please, if you have a moment, just put in the chat something you learned or something you're going to start as you log off. That's going to be helpful to us to know what you take away. But have a good rest of your week, all.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
How do you think that went? Good?
Yeah, I think that went great.
It's good activity in the chat, I think.
Yes,
And
I
the
think
Q&A,
so.
and
Yeah, I
it's
think
awesome.
we could have kept going. So